Awesome. Great. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me again. This is one of my favorite lectures of the year that I always come and do. So yeah, like Juan mentioned, I run engineering for the Mount Sinai BioDesign group. We are a med tech focused incubator and prototyping center here inside the Mount Sinai health system, designed to support innovators both inside Mount Sinai and then at organizations beyond, kind of across the whole med tech space. And so we do a lot of work with industry. We do a lot of work with internal inventors, and our goal is really to support the development of innovative and impactful med tech technologies. And so a big part of that is design thinking and what we call the needs-based innovation process. It's something that I think has become more and more accepted as the standard, really, across not just the medical device and health tech industries, but really the innovation space as a whole. And I think as we get into this, you'll see why. It's a relatively quick presentation, I think, for anybody who's also in Dr. Nickerson's commercialization class. Apologies for repeating this. I just gave this lecture for them on Friday. But I guess, this is your chance to ask questions that maybe didn't come to mind the first time. So, I encourage everybody to to have this be an interactive section. Feel free to either in the chat or over raise your hand and unmute yourself if you have any questions that come up along the way. And ideally it's going to be a nice dynamic interactive session. So let's jump into this. What is needs-based discovery and innovation? When you really get down to it, all successful healthcare innovations are driven by some kind of compelling need, either a patient-focused need, a provider-focused need, a technology gap that needs to be addressed. And so even if you're starting with technology, I'm sure people, especially in the tech bootcamp, who are on that pathway, some of you may be starting with technologies that are already somewhat established, already prototyped to some extent. Even then, it's very important to develop the needs case to go along with that technology, so that your innovation really gets traction and can have success. And so I think it's important to note that you don't need experience or knowledge working in any particular domain to make an impact, as long as you're willing to dive deep and understand the need you're trying to solve. It really is, I'm probably going to say need more than any other word in this presentation today. And it really is the most important part. If you can strongly articulate that, then you're really setting yourself up for success. And so to understand the unmet need, to get to the heart of that, you really have to go through an iterative process that involves background research, observations, and interviews. So when we think about a concise way to synthesize this information, it's usually involving a problem, a population, and an outcome that you put together in a sentence that kind of looks something like this. So, what is our need? A way to address some problem in some population that yields some outcome. And so what form does this take? What are you observing, for each of those things, the problem, the population, and the outcome? What is the problem that you're seeing? What's the population, or in many cases, populations that are interacting with that problem, that are dealing with that problem? And then what is the desired outcome? If you could wave a magic wand, what would the problem look like? What would a solved version of that problem look like? And for all those different groups. And so in healthcare, there's always many populations, and very often a single problem can manifest in different ways across these populations. I think we very frequently, it's hard to forget the patient in a healthcare environment, and the way that the problem may affect them. Relatedly, the provider, the healthcare provider, the physician, the surgeon, the nurse practitioner, the physician's assistant, any of those kinds of people, they may be dealing with the same problem, but from a different perspective. And so different facets of the problem are more relevant to them. And then, of course, you've got all of the other players in the healthcare system. I think most notably payers, the insurance companies, and the things that motivate them. And so really you have to go through and you looking at the questions related to each of these groups. I'm not going to, read every single one of them, but, if you just look at these examples, these are the kind of questions that you want to answer in order to, one, fully understand the scope of the problem you're trying to solve. And then two, as a result of getting these questions answered, you're also from the very beginning, understanding some of the constraints and boundaries that will inform what you design down the line, whether that is a physical device, a digital health app, or even just a new process to be implemented in the healthcare setting. And so, shown another way, I think I like this slide because it really kind of captures just how many groups you might need to be mindful of when you're thinking about an unmet need and how to solve it. Obviously, patients, physicians, payers are on there, but then you also have groups that maybe are not directly related to the unmet need, but play an important role in how it gets communicated, or how technologies get delivered to these other groups, or groups and organizations like patient families, patient advocacy groups, professional societies, who in many cases set the standards that folks like physicians are using in their practice, facility administrators, governments, in some cases even non-governmental organizations. For many unmet needs, each of these groups has something to say about the problem, and whether or not they should be saying something about the problem, they're part of the ecosystem and they're influencing the other folks that maybe are directly interfacing or indirectly interfacing. And so to really understand how this whole network fits together is important, because it just makes your ultimate technology all the stronger for being able to touch on each of these and understand how it all fits together. So to go back to our problem population outcome framework, how do we go down and understand each of these things, and all of the basically the bounding conditions that will affect how we manifest this solution, how we address the need. I think it's obviously, if to go kind of clockwise around this, the disease state fundamentals are crucial to understand when you're addressing a healthcare problem. If you're not being mindful of the anatomy and physiology that is relevant to the issue, you're going to have a hard time solving the problem. And so that's almost always the first place to start with this, is to say, okay, what is the actual clinical need here that we're solving? What is the disease state or the surgical procedure that we're trying to innovate around? And how does that, who's the population? What is the problem that they're facing? And how do we know we've cured this issue? What is the outcome that we know it's working? And I would also say that's probably the easiest one, right? In a lot of cases, you think about examples like a thrombectomy catheter, so something designed to remove a clot from a blood vessel. The problem is fairly self-evident. There's an occlusion of a blood vessel, and the outcome is usually pretty self-evident also, of we want to be able to remove that occlusion without damaging tissue, without creating secondary clots or any other issues. Ideally we go in, we remove it, and problem solved. And then the population in that case is, at a high level, at least everybody who's at risk of this. And so that could be people with AFib, that could be people who have previously had strokes or other cardiovascular conditions or complications. It could be smokers. It could be, all manner of populations there. And so in some cases, depending on the nuances of the disease state, that may increase or decrease the size of your initial population that you want to target. Related to that, I think the next step over, once you understand what is the disease state that we're trying to address here, I think a natural step is to go and say, well, who else has tried solving this problem? Who else has tried addressing this population? Who else has tried to create the outcome that we're seeking to achieve? What are the existing solutions? And I think importantly for existing solutions, it's not just a matter of understanding, who has intellectual property that we have to be mindful of, who has things on the market that we have to be mindful of. If the problem was solved, the existing solutions would be sufficient. And so if there's a problem, if there's still an unmet need, that these existing solutions are not fully getting the job done. They may be solving problems, they may be doing, addressing pieces of this, but maybe they're not addressing all of the unmet needs. And so understanding what parts of the unmet need are still left unaddressed by existing solutions, I think, is even more important than understanding what the existing solutions themselves are doing. I think, and a good example here is often around the population front. There's a lot of, health technology that's been developed that's very effective for lots of communities, but then various minority groups, various disadvantaged groups. When you think about social determinants of health, that's a population problem where maybe the technology works just fine for one group of people, but we've, in the process of designing that solution, completely ignored the needs of some other group. And so how do we then come up with a new solution that maybe addresses the same problem, maybe seeks to achieve the same outcome, but is trying to do it in a different population? I think social determinants of health is probably the biggest instance of this right now in terms of existing solutions that don't address the needs of the whole community. Related to the existing solutions, I think in terms of once you start thinking of how will this product actually exist in the market, what will our business strategy be? The market analysis follows from that in terms of basically looking at what's been done before, understanding how much these various solutions might cost, how much people are willing to pay for solutions, especially when it comes to insurers, identifying things like CPT codes and billing codes that are potentially relevant to your product is very important, because that helps determine are there different market considerations if we go into different populations, or will various outcomes, if we can create a different outcome to meet this need, can we unlock a different part of the market? Got some questions in the chat here, so let me pull this up. Sorry. So from Harshil, how to find these existing solutions for specific diseases or similar problems that we're focusing on. I think this space is largely unorganized, and you don't exactly always find the information that you're looking for on the exact solution. So I think you're right, Harshil. This space is very frequently disorganized. What we frequently do in biodesign is in a lot of cases, these problems aren't totally unaddressed currently. And so we try to, working with our clinician partners and the people who are coming to us, identifying these needs in the OR many times, we learn from them, what is the device technology you're using right now in the OR to solve this problem? And how is it lacking? And so we can start with that, as first suggestion, to kind of dig down a little bit. Usually these things fall into product categories, and so you can start, I'll continue with this thrombectomy example. You can look up thrombectomy catheter and go across all of the major players in the device space, or you can look at, I think therapeutics does this a lot, of having basically the same molecule to treat the same condition, but everybody's got their little variant because of essentially IP. In that case, you can't just copy the molecule that some other company has, and so you make small tweaks, and maybe something's extended release, and maybe something is a faster release, or what have you. I think as long as you have something to start with, which is usually whatever is being used right now, you can dig down and start building out your network. It's kind of the same thing as writing a review paper, really, and we encourage that in the group as well at BioDesign, of going in and understanding what is the state of the art if you're trying to treat blood clots, or if you're trying to treat strokes or subdural hematomas. What is everybody doing right now? And usually people write about this in clinical case studies. They'll write about it in sometimes these consulting groups will put out market analyses, which is usually kind of mostly high level, doesn't really get into the deep details, but it's a start. And you can go and track down instances of technologies being used in clinical trials, for example, on clinicaltrials.gov, or the NIH reporter, where people who are getting these grants to run trials have to publish at least a brief synopsis of what they're doing. So it's definitely, there's a bit of an art to it. There's a bit of, I guess, a little bit of relentlessness. And it's not something that you should stop doing, once you've kind of built your initial body of literature. You should stay, up to date on these things as you progress with your own project, because sometimes people are working on things that they haven't published about yet. And so if you just stop looking at the space and go back into the lab and just do your work, you may miss something. And so you'll come back out, you'll emerge again with your prototype and find out that you've been scooped by somebody. And so you don't want that to happen either. But I think that's generally the protocol we take in biodesign, and it's generally been successful for us. Cool. And then I guess, to put it all together, a great way to synthesize all of this is, a lot of these other things can be done at your computer in isolation, essentially. You can go onto the internet and look up disease state fundamentals. You can go on to Google and search for existing devices and do market analysis. But you really synthesize it all. It really all comes together when you actually do stakeholder analysis and go out and talk to people who are the key opinion leaders, who are the major influencers, who are the buyers, the users, patients. That's where really you almost in many ways validate the information that you're gathering in these other stages. And there's that's really where this needs-based process kicks into gear. So again, to kind of emphasize this, interviews are a huge opportunity to get direct access to leading practitioners and stakeholders, especially at a place like Sinai. We're all Sinai people here. It is exponentially easier for us to knock on the door of somebody who's a leading authority in various healthcare spaces, versus somebody who's completely outside the institution. And that's why programs like Elemental Labs exist even. And so it's really a great opportunity to get firsthand information from the people who are doing this every day. And that's not just surgical and clinical, but even on the administrative side, the people who actually have to handle the billing when the case is done, the people who are talking to insurers, the people who are managing patient care. We're doing this stuff here every day, and so it's really an opportunity to go and get information straight from the horse's mouth. And so you want to be broad with your stakeholder analysis. You want to go across all the areas. If you think back to that cycle diagram I had before, try to talk to people in all of those different groups. And then really this is beginning to build your full market and commercial case to understand, is what I'm working on going to be feasible as a product? And if it is, who are the people that I'm going to try to target first to convince them to buy this thing and to use this thing? And so when you're doing an interview, it's important to ask why. Why are you doing this? Why is this the way it works? Why do you use this product? And then ask why again from some other people in the space. Keep asking why, even though it's starting to get a little ridiculous. Then ask why even more, and really kind of Socratic method your way all the way down to patterns and inconsistencies. You want to find instances where you're getting disparate information, and you also want to find instances, I don't have it on the slide written itself, but look for instances where you're getting the same information from a lot of people. And you want to encourage stories when you're doing this. It works best when you can have somebody kind of break down to you, how do you do or why do you do this? Walk me through what a typical surgery looks like for this procedure, or walk me through a typical billing procedure, or walk me through the patient journey when they come to Mount Sinai for a surgical case. What happens? Because that'll really give you the richest kind of depth and breadth of information. And if you can do that with lots and lots of people, what starts out as qualitative data, sort of somebody telling you a story of a particular instance, if you get it enough times and you hear kind of the same story enough times, you start to realize that these aren't one-offs. These are things that are actually happening all the time. And now we have, we've got data here, we've got signal to noise basically, and we can go in and we can act on this. We now can articulate this data that started as qualitative as something that's quantitative, in the sense of, we estimate that 20% of all patients that come to Mount Sinai for a heart procedure are delayed by 4 hours because of this thing. And we want to solve this thing so that we remove these delays, increase efficiencies, reduce costs, et cetera, et cetera. And when you're doing this, don't suggest answers to questions. You don't want to, we call it leading the witness. And in many cases, you're probably, doing this with some kind of technology and solution in mind already. And it's very tempting. I think, people want to offer up solutions whenever possible. So it's very tempting in these interviews to either just come out and say, would you want to use this product, or to kind of less directly kind of get to those same points of, well, wouldn't it be better if you did this, or wouldn't it be better if we did that? These things may be true, but you want to hear them say it unprompted. You don't want to have to prompt somebody to give that answer, because whether it's true or not, there'll be a bias to say yes. And really you want to understand the core needs, the core problems from the other side, from the user side, or the payer side, or the provider side. Those are the people who are going to be interacting with this technology in a capacity to create value for your venture. And so you want them to really want it. You don't want them to kind of be lukewarm on it. And so again, with these stories, you want to ask about specific instances or occurrences, especially once you start getting some of these trends. I think that's an instance where you can, it's not suggesting an answer, but if you know that every cardiologist you talk to has the same story about using a particular kind of electrophysiology catheter, when you talk to the next cardiologist, you can more specifically come in and say, well, if you use this electrophysiology catheter, can you tell me about a typical case? And then you may hear them speak about the same exact problems that everybody else spoke about beforehand. And that's when you're really onto something. And so, this asking why do we use this kind of Socratic method approach? It's really to understand, where are there competing narratives, where are there competing perspectives, especially when we think about, the many kinds of stakeholder groups involved in healthcare. And then what are the hierarchy of needs? Where can we target, a solution towards? Because usually there's different places you can do it. I think, we often think about, commentary in the tech space where somebody says they're solving a problem, but they're really just, putting a Band-Aid on. It's like, you're not solving the problem, you're solving the symptom. And that happens a lot in medicine also. Sometimes that's the only place where we can act, is to address the symptom and not the cause. But sometimes we can address the cause also. And so really, by asking all of these whys, maybe you're starting at a branch here on the tree and you're working your way all the way down to the trunk. Which in this case, going from let's prevent clots from forming all the way down to, well, let's prevent atrial fibrillation. And, it could be that atrial fibrillation is not something that we're in a position to solve right now. But maybe we can prevent the clot from forming instead of, just removing it after the fact. Maybe we have the ability to create better anticoagulation, or some kind of device that doesn't let them form in the first place. And so that's a good way to kind of understand your targeting, understand in a lot of cases also how broadly applicable your technology is. Maybe your initial target market is the cardiology space, but you can also, by virtue of understanding this whole branching network, maybe you can also serve the neurological space, neurovasculature, in addition to cardiovascular. Maybe you can also work in the pulmonology space because of what you're doing. And so if you're not asking why all the way down, maybe you're only seeing the branch instead of the whole tree that you could be impacting. And so when you're doing these need screening, when you're mapping out your tree, you don't want to close your mind. You want to collect several potential needs. You want to see all those different branches and opportunities, and try to do a needs assessment in each of those cases. Understand at least at a moderate level, what does the unmet need look like on each of these branches, in each of these places? Is it different, as I go from branch to branch? Am I changing population? Am I changing outcome? Is the problem a little bit different? And then, what need is the most appropriate to address for you, for your technology, for your team's strengths? Is there one that's maybe easier to target for regulatory reasons than the others, at least initially? Is it a good, beachhead market to start with, and then you can branch out to these other spaces? All of those opportunities exist, and so you don't want to close yourself off prematurely. And, I think a good kind of high level strategy when you're doing these analyses is to look for human processes that can be performed more efficiently, more reliably by a potential technology. That's kind of one type of unmet need. Another type of unmet need is problems with existing technologies that require improvement. We see that a lot in biodesign, where there are surgical devices that solve a problem, but not as well as it could. Maybe it doesn't do it as quickly, or it doesn't do it as reliably, or it just has bad user experience for the clinicians, and so they don't reach for it unless they really, really need to. And those are problems not just on the clinical side, but then whoever is making these devices currently, their mission, if you're Medtronic, is to sell more devices and get your device used more frequently. And so if there's a problem where a surgeon isn't using your device because of basically user interface reasons, if you can improve that user interface, that the way they interact with the technology, that can solve not just a clinical problem for physicians, but also a business problem for existing companies. And then you want to look for gaps in care that are not resolved with currently available technology or human processes. I think a lot of stuff around patient care and patient management and care management falls under this category, where there's just you come in and you're with one group of people during a surgical procedure, and then you're with a different group of people in the recovery phase, and maybe there's gaps in care, there's gaps in tracking, there's data being lost along the way that would be valuable to other groups in the healthcare continuum. And so I think these are three major categories that you want to look for when you're doing this whole analysis: opportunities that exist for in terms of the ways unmet needs will manifest themselves. And then once you select and test your ideas, once you get to the phase, you say, okay, we've done a good bit of background research. We know our problem, our population, our outcome. We know why the existing solutions aren't getting the job done. It's time to go back into the lab and start building our prototypes. And that's all well and good. You want to do that. But even while you're building your prototypes, don't stop talking to stakeholders during the design and testing phase. A big reason is their feedback. Their continued feedback on the prototyping can guide your solution designing. It can guide your marketing, which I think is often underappreciated in terms of the importance in effectively delivering a solution. And so you can have a great prototype, but if you don't know how to communicate how it solves the unmet need, nobody's going to want to use it. And so by maintaining connections with your stakeholders in that design and testing phase, you're learning not just the design changes and engineering changes that have to be made, but all of the considerations that go into how are you going to talk about this thing once it's ready to be used. And importantly, it keeps your potential customers and advocates engaged. People feel like they have skin in the game. They feel like they've played a part in this, and they're going to, when the time comes, advocate to use the product, advocate for hospitals to buy it, advocate for their colleagues to promote it, and they're going to, serve as basically advocates in the space writ large. And so that was from my other presentation. We're gonna not go there. I think that's a future lecture in this program. But so that's the end of my my formal presentation portion here. So we had a couple questions in the chat that I was able to answer. I encourage more people to jump in. Happy to talk more about this and continue with case examples from biodesign, other examples that I've encountered in my work, from Sinai and beyond.